Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bill Even, your CEO at the Pork Checkoff here in Des Moines, Iowa. Thank you for joining our COVID-19 Animal Welfare Tools for Pork Producers webinar here this afternoon. And it's a tough situation that we're in. We did a webinar on Sunday afternoon as well, trying to help our producers get prepared. But as we start this call today, as you may saw on the news or on your social media feeds, we just got word here around noon that the President of the United States is authorizing use of the Defense Production Act to require the meat plants in the United States to operate. While we don't have the exact text of the executive order yet, and there'll be many details to follow, certainly is a step in the positive direction to understand that we will balance public welfare and the health of our workers in the meat industry with the need to run operations for processing meat. And so with that, as a way to get started, I'll have to go to the next slide. The National Pork Board does take antitrust issues very seriously. All of our board meetings, as well as these webinars, we want to ensure everybody that understands that antitrust is an issue, and we do intend to follow the law on that. The next slide goes into just a couple of high-level points, and that's, we pull this information together with our colleagues at the USDA and other government agencies, as well as publicly available information to get it out to you in real time, and that the views expressed by our invited speakers are theirs and not those of the Pork Board, which does not advocate, endorse, or suggest any particular course of conduct that may be covered. So on the next slide, we have our website, our 1-800 number, and our email address. If you've got questions about this webinar or anything that we can do to help you, we've got your back on this. We've got our colleagues at the National Pork Producers Council actively involved as well. On the next slide, we'll show the speakers today. Myself here talking to you this morning, we have Dr. Dave Pyburn, our Chief Veterinarian. Dr. Bret Marsh, Indiana State Veterinarian, is joining us from Indiana. Dr. Gordon Spronk, veterinarian and chairman of Pipestone. He's going to speak a little bit later. And then Dr. David Newman, who is a pork producer and our current president of the National Pork Board from Arkansas. And then closing with Dr. Liz Wagstrom, the chief veterinarian from the Pork Producers Council. The next slide goes through our agenda here today. We're going to talk about feeding strategies. Many of you may have your eye on this or doing it already. We know that a number of production systems have started euthanasia as an emergency method or are preparing for that, and then the disposal options as well. We'll get some comments from Dr. Newman, our president, and some comments from Liz Wagstrom on what the Pork Producers Council is working on as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to our chief veterinarian, Dr. Dave Pyburn.
Sorry, guys, I was muted. Nate, can you back up a slide? So what we're going to cover quickly this morning or this afternoon is feeding strategies, that information we've got out there on being able to slow down growth. We'll talk a little bit about AVMA approved euthanasia options and disposal options. And let's move on from that. Go on, Nate. So we do have information up at pork.org/COVID-19 on feeding strategies to reduce growth. We've also got the fact sheet that you can see there in front of you. There are ways to slow pigs some. I mean, we have raised our pigs, and we have actually selected our pigs to become very good growers, actually. And we also, the way we raise pigs today with our barns is not really all that conducive to being able to slow them, and we've never been about that. And I hope we're never about that again. But there are a few things that you can do. You can transition your diets to a more low energy diet, add fiber to the diet. This would involve removing all sources of added fat to the diet, replacing any of your high energy feedstuffs with fiber feedstuffs to give the pig the sensation of being full sooner. Adjust your lysine to calorie ratio. It can help you to slow down as well. And then, of course, I think it goes somewhat without saying, but remove any growth promoting technology that you would have in the feed that has been enabling them to grow faster. We can also work with the feeders. We can work to limit feed intake by closing and tightening down those feeder gates. I've seen on social media, I'm friends with several producers on there, that some folks are reporting some success with both working with their diets and also tightening up those feeders on the pigs. And somewhat, in the olden days, we used to be able to do some limit feeding. Really can't do that because we've got with the feeding system we have now and then slats on the floor, we really can't just be putting out a limited amount of feed. And if we just have our feeders open for a limited amount of time, all you're going to end up doing is feeding the boss hogs in there and not feeding anybody else. So that doesn't work either. Some other options that we can look at now is we can and speak with your nutritionist on this as you're working through this, but feed higher levels of calcium chloride. Feeding corn-only diets can help them to slow some. Controlling the barn temp, and I have seen several social media posts from producers on this as well, where they've looked at increasing the barn temp, playing with the ventilation and the fans, so that it's warmer in there and the pigs are consuming less feed. And then controlling stocking density, what that involves, if you have the ability to do it, research has shown that when you take off that top end hog, that the rest of them then will start to compensate, and they'll actually get up to the feeder more and grow quicker. So if we're leaving the top end hog in there, leaving them a little bit tighter in there, they're going to eat a little less. Next slide. So let's talk just briefly on euthanasia and the options for those folks that unfortunately are looking at the last resort of having to protect animal welfare and having to move to a euthanasia type of situation. The first thing I want to say right here is these are the American Veterinary Medical Association approved methods. In the left-hand column, those are the preferred methods by the AVMA. And in the middle column, those are permitted in constrained circumstances. So what allows you to move to permitted methods? Because the preferred methods are the first methods you should choose if you can do those. There are many different potential constraints for situations that would allow people to move into that permitted column and choose that method. Some, but not all of them. I have chosen a few here that are maybe more applicable to our situation. Is human safety. Anytime you're doing euthanasia, you want to balance both animal welfare as well as worker safety. Depopulation efficiency, and the need to get the depopulation done more quickly, or also efficiency as far as labor that you have available to assist you with this depopulation effort. That goes into the next potential constraint, which is deployable resources. Depending on what you've got for resources that you can deploy to depopulate is a potential constraint, and then that leads into one of the other options or one of the other constraints that's listed by AVMA, and that is the equipment that you have available. No matter where you're at in this decision, no matter where you're at as far as maybe needing to move to a euthanasia, a depopulation type event, the absolute first thing you need to do is contact your herd veterinarian. You need to sit down with that herd veterinarian, work through a depopulation checklist, which we have on our website, as well as the recommendations document that we have on our website on depopulation events, so that you and your veterinarian can have a discussion on what would be the best plan for your pigs, for your farm, and for your workers. You'll want to take a look at those documents. One of them leads you through a checklist on everything you need to think about before you implement a plan. The other one helps you to walk through the decisions, and then also gives you a document where you and your veterinarian can walk through and you can list the justification for some of the choices that you make. The second discussion you should have as you're moving towards looking at euthanasia on your farm would be with your state animal health official. These folks need to be contacted. They've got, they know what we're dealing with out there in the field, of course. They've got state contacts that can help with state-specific issues such as environmental issues with disposal, and also with applicable state and federal animal cruelty laws, which you'll also need to check in your states because they do vary by states. Nate, let's go to the next one. So some of the euthanasia resources that we have at that same website, pork.org, COVID-19, and there are a number of resources up there. We're not even listing all of them here for sure. One of the things I would draw your attention to is a recorded webinar. We did a webinar on Sunday And it was a webinar focused on what are your choices as far as euthanasia, an in-depth look at the ability to use carbon dioxide as a euthanasia method, and then also your disposal options and how to choose your disposal options and what resources are out there from especially USDA to help you with those disposal options. So again, take a look at the website, pull this information down, use it as you're making your decisions if you are faced with this. Next slide. And this is a slide from that webinar, and Lori Miller with USDA was on there on Sunday with us, and she walked through a whole host of information that USDA has applicable to disposal and decisions we're having to make, and questions that you need to bring up with your state animal health official, with your DNR, and with environmental folks within your states. What I wanted to do with this slide was just give you an idea of what are the options that could be in front of you. For most states, most of these will be an option. For some states, it may not be an option when you start looking at the ability to bury or the ability to burn, especially. That may not be an option in some areas in some states. So, but this is a listing here of everything that you do have in front of you that could be a potential option as you consider what you're going to do for disposal in a euthanasia depopulation event. Next slide, please. So again, back to our website, that webinar's up there, and many other pieces of information are up there. What I want to address here real quickly is the NRCS EQIP funding that may be available to you. In fact, for most folks, it should be available from what I'm hearing from the state vets as we go through our morning calls and discuss situations in each of the states right now that are dealing with this situation. What you need to make sure you do, and this again goes back to contacting that state animal health official before you set a plan into action. But before any one pig were to die, you need to have your NRCS either application in or a waiver to be eligible for funding to be able to help you with these disposal costs. So make sure you're contacting your state animal health official. Make sure you're doing it well ahead of any planned depopulation event. So you don't disqualify yourself for being able to tap into some of these NRCS EQIP funds that could be available, and in most states are available to help you with disposal. Next slide, please. And so this is a screenshot that I took real quick from our website because I wanted to guide you a little better. At that page, you on the COVID-19, pork.org COVID-19 page down to about the middle of the page is what I've done here. And you'll see that there's a whole resources section, but then right below that is planning for emergency depopulation and disposal. All of these resources that I've talked to you about today are available at that view resources tab or the blue click on within the paragraph there as well. So I wanted to make sure you knew how to get right to all the resources if you are having to consider planning for a depopulation and disposal event. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Marsh.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pyburn, and good afternoon to you all. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to participate in the webinar today. I wanted to advise folks on the call today that there is a 15-state working group of 15 most populous pork states, and their state veterinarians have been meeting for nearly a year, as it turns out, for ASF preparedness. And so because of those continuing discussions, we've morphed that into not only continue to talk about ASF and foreign animal diseases, but certainly now it's become a COVID-19 call. So it has been expanded. We're meeting on a daily basis just to keep current on what's going on in each of your states as this incident and this pandemic continues to roll out. On the next slide, I wanted to go over just the 3 primary bullet points that we are emphasizing not only in our state, but across the country, and I think you will agree. The first one is to reopen and to keep open the packing plants. And your CEO, Bill, even at the top of the call here, has indicated that the president is expected to sign an executive order with regard to keeping the meat plants open. And of course, there are those that are already closed, and I will be curious, of course, to see how we need to proceed under that executive order. But indeed, even in light of that executive order, we see that as job one. because the upstream impacts on item 2 for euthanasia disposal become less if we can indeed reopen and keep these packing plants open. To give you a sense of what we have done here in Indiana, and I know this is occurring with your state veterinarians across the country, we have made personal visits to these packing plants. I have here in Indiana, as we lost 2 of our pork packing facilities. In addition to just going as a state animal health official, we felt it's extremely important to educate those in the public health community. So our deputy commissioner of the state health department, the county health officials in that county accompanied us on that tour, took a look at the facility, went through all of their metrics for what they're doing inside the plant in order to protect the health of the workers in the facility. And I was struck with the fact, frankly, of the measures that these plants have taken, particularly in this incident where you're flying blind, so to speak. There are no given instructions on how to run a packing plant in these kinds of situations, and yet they've gone to extreme measures to protect their employees and keep the food supply moving forward. I think it's therefore important that it's also recognized in our conversations with public health and CDC that there's no scientific foundation for the 14-day closures. And we've been in conversations with the packing interests about trying to decrease that period of time. CDC says that didn't come from us, and we understand that. On the other hand, it's kind of become the length of time that's been chosen. And so we're doing everything we can here in Indiana to shorten that period of time, including a series of calls with the meat plant operators, our public health partners, and animal health, trying to find the best way forward. And I think those collaborations are bearing fruit. One of the things that's particularly important as we deal with opening these packing plants is some recent information that has come from CDC. This information is critical in determining how to manage the employees in the structures. And of course, this could also apply to those of you at the farm level, if you're in any of the number of critical infrastructure facilities. But this particular guidance was just released Sunday afternoon by CDC. It speaks specifically to meat and poultry processing workers and employers, and has several pages of recommendations for what their expectations are or recommendations are for packing plants. I will share with you that based on having visited these plants and now reading the guidance from CDC, that much of that has already been done. They've been working hard to protect the employees in these plants, and in my opinion, and taking a look at what we have seen in these structures, these employees may be safer in the facility than they may be in the local communities. The other important aspect of that document is embedded in it is a document that says, how do you discontinue the isolations of individuals who are COVID-19 positive? And this becomes really important if indeed we continue to do testing or broaden testing over the coming days as tests become more available. There are 3 categories for employees, and again, this could apply to your farm operations as well. You have a negative employee, understanding that they're negative on the day of the test. So it's not as if they'll continue to stay negative without other measures. But at the point of the test, you have negative individuals. The second category are those that are asymptomatic positive. So they're not showing any clinical symptoms, but they're positive on test. And this is the piece that we needed from CDC, and we just secured it on Sunday afternoon late, that said, okay, those individuals need to be out of the workplace under isolation for 7 days. And I suspect that as we continue to test in these operations, we'll have several individuals in this category, and we didn't have specific instructions on how best to manage them. And of course, if we can isolate them for 7 days and return them back to work, that of course is 7 days shorter than a 14-day shutdown. The third category of employee are the symptomatic employees, and of course, they're the ones that have been encouraged not to report to work, but rather to stay at home and not therefore potentially infect others in the workplace or even in the community. So it was extremely important to get this additional information and data, compare and match that with what we could accomplish at the local level. One of our packing plants has already tested all of their employees, over 2,000. The laboratory data is being evaluated so we can determine which of those individuals can return to work and which need more appropriate and extensive medical care. And so that's ongoing. The second plant in our state is actually in conversation today about testing their employees. And I do hope that the executive order from the White House will help clarify some of the next steps for these facilities as they go to extreme measures to keep them open as a part of the critical infrastructure of the country. The second item on here, the second bullet, is the approach to euthanasia and disposal. And indeed, of course, if we can't get facilities reopened and we have a backup at the farm level, we've taken a look at space distribution, whether in your production system or frankly someone else's, in order to avoid euthanasia of animals unnecessarily. But nonetheless, if we get to the point where we need to euthanize, Dr. Pyburn and the webinar on Sunday went into great detail on those options that are available to us, either through the AVMA's guidance, through the National Pork Board and others, and then of course seeking out information from your state animal health officials or even your environmental agency in your state, depending upon what can be done or not done in your particular state. In our situation in Indiana, as is the case in several states, the water table is such that burial, deep burial, is not a good option, so we continue to look for others. And we have even harkened back to a process that we used in the latter days as a pseudorabies eradication program. And I know some of you on the call will remember those days. But in Indiana, we set up a stationary site at one location in Indiana where we depopulated in the neighborhood of 300,000 pigs. They were done in two different ways. One was we had a V-shaped conveyor system that actually came out of an old packing plant. It was a two-stage process where we electrocuted those pigs. By conveyor, they went up into a rendering truck and were rendered from that point forward. In addition to that, the lighter pigs were put into box trailers. We used bottle CO2. There's metrics for how many pigs and how many bottles, et cetera, but a box trailer worked quite well for those lighter pigs. And then they indeed would be offloaded off those trailers and put onto rendering trucks in that particular situation. Therefore, we have, as it turns out, it's been 20 years since that was done. One of my staff members did indeed find that equipment in an old scrap yard, and so it's going to a machine shop to get it retooled and re-equipped, so it's ready to go, and we're looking for a stationary site where it can be used. That's one option. That's the one that we're going to take a look at closely here. But even yet, you still, of course, have the disposal issues. So we reached out to our rendering partners. They've offered to provide as much help as possible. Additionally, you've seen the instructions on composting, and that, of course, has been used on many of your farms for many years. And there may be more body mass, and so you may need to consider what additional carbon sources you might need to bring to bear. But nonetheless, composting has been effectively used for a number of years. We've also reached out to our Department of Environmental Management to see what options we might have in landfills. And so landfills have agreed to work with us. We have a survey going out to them to determine if they will participate, since they're private entities. And two, if they will participate, what sort of mass might they take to give us some sense of what disposal option we might have there. So again, job one is to get the plants open and use this product for food. Of course, we're all clear we've been raising these pigs for food and not for landfill material. And if we can't get that done, moving into the second approach for euthanasia and disposal. And again, I believe even though there aren't real good options for depopulating animals at the farm level, we're taking a look at a central site that might be utilized as we did, frankly, 20 years ago. But I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that third bullet, and that's the messaging and communications, which is so extremely important, as you know, throughout this incident. Our public information director is heavily involved in the Joint Information Center, which is a part of the Emergency Operations Center at the state of Indiana. This is common in every state. And so the communications and messaging, not only to those of us in agriculture, but those in the public that have specific questions about what's going on and what they may be reading or hearing in the popular press, and making those corrections to that information as is necessary. So the communications has been important. We've been partnering very closely with Indiana Pork, as the state veterinarians in other states are doing with their state execs, along with Pork Board, NPPC, AASV. They've all been great partners as we move through this process with the resources they have available. I should also mention, and we have on our website, and it's available on other websites, mental health and well-being resources, which I believe are critically important as well. This is indeed a stressful time. It's unique to our experience. It is unprecedented, and so it may cause stressors for individuals, and want to make sure that those resources are available for individuals. But I think in the bottom line, the U.S. pork industry has survived a lot of challenges over the decades, and just as is the case with this one, it has always faced these challenges head on, and I am confident we will prevail. And I think we'll prevail because we'll stay connected, We'll stay informed, and we must stay positive. So those of you who are out there on the front line, hang in there. I know it is challenging, but nonetheless, I'm confident that we'll prevail as we have in other incidents in the past. And the last slide, on the next slide, there is the information for that CDC guidance. And I know many of you are not in the packing business, but it might be of interest to you to see what your packers are dealing with, to understand what the expectations are for them from the CDC in managing, processing workers on these lines. And then in addition to that, that second document I referred to, the discontinuation of isolation, which is critically important as well. I pull those out because if you've been to the CDC website, it is chock full of information, and to find these specific pieces can be challenging, but I wanted you to have them here today. So CEO Bill Even, my thanks to you, Dr. Pyburn, and others for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation here today. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Spronk.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. Bill Even, your CEO of the National Pork Board, has asked me to share, unfortunately, our experience, because we faced, our team has faced this situation before of the euthanasia of large populations of pigs, with our experience in Asia with ASF, as Dr. Marsh and Dr. Pyburn have alluded to before. The focus in the past, for the past week since August of 18, has been on ASF in regards to euthanasia. Well, now those observations and those skills and that process we're now applying to this current situation. Next slide, please. I'd like to spend just a very, very few minutes with you, not on the technical details of euthanasia or disposal, but more on the decision-making process. And so I put up just two simple slides intended to face the reality and help everyone get on the same page, if you will. So this is simply a presentation of our U.S. hog harvest capacity. Highlighted in yellow on this slide is the 504,000 head per day of capacity. So now you'll see many variations of this presentation because there's differences between capacity and the actual running number of heads slaughtered, but this is capacity times the 5.4 business days per week, because Monday through Friday is, well, that's 5 days. There's the occasional plant and the occasional Saturday operations that gets us to a 0.4 or point some number times the 52 weeks per year. So total capacity in the United States today is 141 million head, or per week 2.7 million head. Again, capacity. Next slide, please. So this is what we face. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19 and the interventions placed by the appropriate authorities in response to COVID-19, we are not harvesting to the capacity of the previous slide that I just showed you. Now, there's 4 simple lines on this slide, and as we all know, this changes nearly by the hour. So recognize very candidly that this slide's not accurate, and it may not be accurate in the next hour, and it may need to be updated on a daily basis. But for illustration purposes, it's showing that if we have a interruption of harvest capacity, if you draw your eye to the blue arrow on the far right, which we estimate we're at either end of business yesterday or today, around 50%, some would argue 35, 40, but for this purpose and discussion, let's just conclude that it's between 40 and 50%. On the second line, then, you see the hogs not harvested per day. If you believe the number previously of the capacity of 500,000 head, then if we have a disruption of that capacity due to plant closures, somewhere between 50,000 at 10% to 250,000 head of hogs were not harvested. Well, unfortunately, that builds up like the kindergarten case of musical chairs, where not everyone can sit down at the same time. Unfortunately, in the case of harvesting hogs, more hogs are added rather than people taken away in the case of musical chairs, resulting in a sudden buildup where you can see per week, if at the current rate, last week we had around 600 to 700 hogs that did not get slaughtered. This week on Friday, at the same case, there might be a doubling of that, again, for illustration purpose and fairly accurate depending on your point of view, of between 1.3 to 1.4 million hogs will not get harvested. Now, if you take that all the way out, in a worst case scenario, you can conclude for yourself on the very last line. So the remainder of my time, I'll just spend on, well, once we agree and face this reality, how do we come to a decision? And as previous speakers have said, they use words like unprecedented. They use words like uncharted. And I would urge you on your farm to form a crisis management team. If you already haven't formed a team, you may wish to consider your veterinarian, your nutritionist, key staff, because these decisions, while other decisions are being made in faraway places, this decision will be made on your farm. And I'd ask you to consider that it's a decision you make with respect and care under the We Care principles of the National Pork Board and our industry, including the National Pork Producers Council. Thirdly, I'd ask you to consider that these are animals that we're dealing with. And so we need to do the right thing. We need to respect the life and death situation we're making, and we need to make this decision with compassion and care, because what we've seen in Asia, sometimes we are overwhelmed by the numbers. Sometimes we don't implement our plan very well. In the social media and culture we live in, sometimes we need to carefully consider the actions we take. And I would just encourage you, before you push send on any social media, you might want to do like my 6th grade teacher taught me, you know, Gordon, maybe you should put that in the drawer for 24 hours before you send that letter. I think maybe there's some wisdom the same here in social media, that while we may have the emotion of wanting to send a message, I'd ask you to carefully consider it. And as Dr. Marsh has so eloquently pointed out, this could turn into and be aware of your mental health, not only of yourself, but also of your team members, because sometimes we may face decision fatigue, especially in our planting season. We're all agriculturalists. Many of us are fully aware of the planting season we're in, so we're multitasking. We're making many decisions. I would just ask you to share with others on your team exactly how you're feeling. Again, as someone else so eloquently put, think of the things you're thinking. Be aware of your mental state of mind. Be aware of your emotion. One emotion that I've seen very commonly in agriculture, including myself, so I'll be my first critic, that anger might be your first response. And you know, Grandpa always taught me, whatever you can do with anger, you can do it better without it. So as Dr. Marsh has put clearly stated, be aware of the mental health of your team and yourself. Reach out for help. You've got resources that he's already pointed out. I was just on a professional call yesterday. Minnesota also has professional help. Ted asked to be introduced as Ted Matthews, a trained clinical psychiatrist with the state of Minnesota, been in agriculture for 30 years. So he's dealt with calls of all the things related to agriculture. He allowed me to share his name and his telephone number, 320-266-2390. Call him if you think you have a concern. And finally, last slide, next slide, please. I'd just like to point out to everybody on our call and encourage them that they allow our current leadership team to lead. Bill and his team at the National Pork Board has clearly stepped up now. And Bill, you may want to explain further, and I'm sure you have, on your command center, that you wish to communicate to our industry on these two important issues of depopulation, euthanasia, and disposal. I'd also ask you to support Bill, not only Bill at the National Pork Board, Neil at the National Pork Producers Council, Juliana at the National American Meat Institute. There are leaders that are leading. And I'd ask you that rather than making a complaint, which we probably all have legitimate reasons to be frustrated with the current situation, I'd encourage you to call them or send a text or send an email and say, hey, how can I help? And finally, thank you for your consideration, and I encourage you all in your decision-making process. That concludes my remarks, and I'd like to turn it over to your president, David Newman.
Thank you, Dr. Spronk. And good afternoon, everyone. There's been some very educational information shared here on the call this afternoon. And as your president, I just wanted to have a few remarks as well to talk about some of the things that are going on here and a little bit of my perspective. I think Dr. Marsh said it very good for those of us on the front lines, and that's who we are, the producers. We're out here on the front lines of this at the production level every day, and it is a crisis situation, and it's very tough for many of our producers. I think Dr. Spronk, you also put it very eloquently there in the way you talk, and I appreciate that. About this is a people problem, and it's also an animal problem. So we're going to deal with this using the best case scenario, or the best resources we have rather at hand. So it's impacting all of our producers. I know that everyone on this call knows this very well, regardless of size of operation, regardless of where you're at. We definitely understand that all producers of all sizes and all locations are being impacted in one way or another. Certainly, there are many of our producers who are in some of the regions where we're seeing plant closures that are having a more immediate impact. And as Bill pointed out at the beginning of the call today, some of the work that's being done, hopefully that comes to fruition here sooner rather than later. We just hope and pray that that comes to a point where it starts to alleviate some of this pressure that's been laid out to us here in the data. So as you've heard today, there are numerous people and numerous organizations working tirelessly on our behalf as producers. And this is certainly no time for accolades. This is just a time to say where our dollars are hard at work on our behalf. And as a producer, and certainly as president, I speak for our board, and I think I speak for most of our producers as well when I say this is why we design systems like this. When I hear Dr. Marsh, Dr. Spronk, Dr. Pyburn, Dr. Wagstrom coming up, as well as our leadership, all talking about the way that we've come together in a unified message system and unified in our communication. These are the type of things that we're here for. And this is what the checkoff exists for. It's not just for good times, it's for working on the behalf of the producer during these times and putting together the necessary tools we need immediately to get out here and work on behalf of our producers. Dr. Spronk also mentioned the We Care principles, and I know that our producers, these are the pillars that we live by every single day on our operations. So we are doing some constant communication, talking with producers about working with veterinarians and making wise decisions on the farm. And one of the things I'd like to point out is a few of the things that we're doing. We want and encourage all producers to use all of the resources that we have available for them. We've deployed some things here in terms of a crisis plan at the National Pork Board level, and we've reallocated a lot of our checkoff dollars quickly. We've established, as I was pointed out in the slide right here, we have some We Care grants that are helping states. It's helping with equipment. It's helping with numerous things that are impacting the states, and that's a big piece of this. It's about getting the resources into the regions that matter, where people are being impacted the most, while keeping continuity of business with all of the other pieces, because this is a very real situation. And I think Dr. Spronk also pointed something out. It's evolving very quickly. It's moving fast. This isn't changing by the day. It's changing by the hour or by the minute. But we want people to understand that we have resources that are here. And also, I think is something that's very important for all of our producers to understand, is that although this is a crisis situation and this is at the forefront of our thought process right now, we still have not forgotten that we are still dealing with a foreign animal disease threat with ASF spreading around the world, and we're continuing to allocate resources and time and expertise into some of the other things that are still impacting our industry, aside from these more immediate things that have happened in light of the coronavirus outbreak. So we want the checkoff to be there for our animals and for our people. And it's teams that are important. And this is something that I think about often is I've heard Bill even say this many times, this isn't about the me, this is about the we. And I think right now, as we push through these times, this is demonstrating. We've got great collaboration between NPPC, the Pork Checkoff, our state veterinarians, our Swine Health Information Center, NAMI, the list goes on. And our other proteins are hurting as well. So we're not the only ones in this battle, but right now this is about being resilient, being able to work together as teams and really try to accomplish the tasks that we have at hand. So I'm just going to wrap up with saying that we, the producers, appreciate all the work being done by the other individuals on this call and everyone else out there. And we do encourage you to use, we have the resources at National Pork Board. We have a COVID-19 website. We have the Incident Command Center. You can call in to check off. You can, this is for a variety of reasons, whether it is talking about depopulation, disposal, or otherwise, or mental health issues or otherwise. We want to be sure that we've got the resources available for everyone out there. So, just in closing, this is just a trying time, and as a producer, my heart goes out to all the other people that are being impacted, and optimistic we're going to see a silver lining here sooner rather than later. So thanks for everything everybody's doing out there. And I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Liz Wagstrom to speak for a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all who are on the call. There's a lot going on operationally between all of our organizations. So I wanted to touch quite a little bit on the what's going on in Washington, D.C., what we're trying to do on your behalf in the regulatory, legislative, government relations side of this crisis management. And one of the last one of these webinars I was on, we had summed it up or provided a copy of a press release and a letter we had sent to some of the highest level of the U.S. government on March 10th. And in that, it was talking about our needs to fix labor in this issue. And if we really look at what's going on, our lack of labor at the plants, the inability to have people feel safe to go to work, or people that are able to go to work, is what's really causing this backup. And in that March 10th release, we had said the specter of market-ready hogs with nowhere to go is a nightmare for every pork producer in the country. So, we've seen this train coming. We've been working as hard as we can to try to look at some solutions to help producers on those issues. So just wanted to give you a little update of some of the things that we have already gotten from the government that have been helpful. The first thing, of course, is the direct payments to producers. When we asked for money, we had hoped not to have a cap of the $125,000 per producer, but we did get $1.6 billion. It's not nearly enough. We're going back. There's a COVID-4 package being put together this week, and we're hopefully when Congress gets back in session, they were supposed to come back in next Monday, they will be able to quickly put that package together and look at voting on it. We've also, thanks to Dallas Hockman and his preparation and the work he did with previous programs on pork purchases, our leading of all of the commodities in the purchases that are going into feeding programs and food banks. Pork was well positioned from having been involved in those programs before to get significant amounts of product out the door, especially quite a bit of that product that was labeled for food service that couldn't be easily diverted to retail, and that's freeing up some cold storage facilities for us. The Small Business Administration Payroll Protection Program, Maria Ziba at our office in DC, has become a small business administration expert in addition to what she does with trade. Worked very hard to get make sure that farmers could be involved in the payroll protection program. We're working on that situation where if farmers hadn't shown a profit, they may or have not been able to, last year may not have been able to be involved in the payroll protection program. Working really hard to get that resolved, as well as to get farmers to be eligible for the economic injury disaster loans. We've worked with a coalition of the farm commodity groups in DC to try to expand this next round of COVID funding. Michael Formica and Tom Hebert, Michael who's in our office and Tom who is a consultant, have been working really hard with USDA, the EQIP funding for the potential to help with disposal. Just had emails as we were on the phone here or on this webinar with them saying that they keep hearing that EQIP is going to be opened up for help with disposal. It is going to be capped at $25,000 per barn per method you might use for disposal. So if you were to compost some animals and then landfill other animals, you could have up to 50,000 because it'd be 25,000 per method. Also, Michael's been very involved at the upper reaches of FEMA to try to get word down through the state FEMA agencies that this would be a FEMA emergency in which they could also help with disposal. And certain states like North Carolina are way far ahead of other states that because of previous emergencies they've had to use FEMA for. So the states have been helping each other. And then lastly, Michael had early on worked to make sure as we were addressing the labor shortage, realizing that there were going to be fewer people maybe running trucks up and down the road trying to, because of health issues, that we were able to get waivers of the DOT hours of service rule. The other thing you heard Dr. Marsh talk about our 16-state veterinarian group. Early on, I'd reached out to Bret several times and asked his advice, tried to pick his brain because he's always one of those great sources of information. And it was at his suggestion we started organizing that state veterinarians group to really start not only continuing their ASF preparedness work, but meeting with us to talk about this crisis. So it's been every day, including Saturdays, that we have been getting that group together. We have expanded it so it's not only the state veterinarians in your national organizations, but we have the swine veterinarians, we have SHIC, we have NAMI, but we also have the state executives for the pork organizations in those states, as well as our national partners at USDA, APHIS, and NRCS is starting to join as well. And so that's been very helpful. You know, we've learned from each other's states as far as the example, North Carolina knows how to work through FEMA, whereas other states may not have. We were pleased to see on last Friday that USDA APHIS announced an incident coordination team. And I think the verbiage is really strong there. We are coordinating, they are coordinating, nobody is commanding, working to coordinate with the states and the industry to look at how best to utilize each other's resources and abilities. And so they opened up the National Veterinary Stockpile, and while APHIS has a lot of experience in mass depopulation of poultry, not so much with the mass depopulation of swine. So some of the tools we would have liked to have used may not be in the veterinary stockpile, but they have the ability to contract for additional services and resources that could help with that mass depopulation. Also, they are helping coordinate that we get that state level technical assistance from NRCS. So as an example, if animals are composted, they can actually contract with NRCS to go out and check compost piles and make sure that they're heating to the right temperatures, et cetera. And again, working to make sure that EQIP funding for disposal is available under current program guidelines. So our next steps from NPPC is to continue to advocate for those additional support during this crisis. We're working on operational coordination with APHIS, our state agencies, the national and state pork and veterinary organizations, and in fact, I'm currently now sitting in at the pork board so we can have a easy communications between the organizations. And we're going back to the Hill, and the three main things we're really focused on is, number one, let's work as our top priority to keep open and reopen plants, and work as hard as we can to get pigs going to plants to make into pork. That's what we've all worked so hard to do, is to make sure we're producing pork. Secondly, we're looking at getting resources for depopulation and disposal, so that those are not out-of-pocket expenses for producers who have to tragically take those steps. And thirdly, looking at trying to indemnify and get reasonable indemnity for pork producers who have had to euthanize pigs, trying to do that retroactively to when we started seeing the first of those depopulation efforts. So with that, I will turn it back to the organizers, and just know that NPPC, Pork Board, as well as our veterinary organizations and North American Meat, as well as we're getting Schick and the Swine Health Information Center, are all working on your behalf during this crisis.
Thank you very much, Liz. And on the next slide, I want to just repeat something that Dr. Marsh and Dr. Spronk also covered on. And at the pork.org COVID page, here are a list of stress management resources. This is not fun, having to destroy what you've raised. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure you've got access to anything that you may need. And on the next slide, just in closing, again, here's the website, the phone number, and our email address. I think as it stands here today, if there's any good news, it's the Defense Production Act, and thanking the administration for moving in that direction. The cutout continues to climb. We're at about 8370, which is roughly the equivalent where we were at a year ago. Although right now the daily slaughter numbers are showing at about 318,000 out of the USDA, about 32% lower year over year. So ultimately, it looks like we're moving forward with balancing public health and worker safety at the plants with a very clear understanding we do need to produce food in this country. We all know that the pigs are available. This is a problem with the disease and a problem in our production system and logistics. So as we get that worked out, we're going to plow through this, and it's going to take another month, 6 weeks. But at a bare minimum, as Dr. Newman said, our president, it's about the we and helping each other through this. I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Bret Marsh, Dr. Gordon Spronk, and Dr. Liz Wagstrom, as well as our own Dr. Dave Pyburn, for speaking today. Thanks, and be safe out there. Goodbye.